Pen, Pencil, and Poison, A Study in Greed by Oscar Wilde. It has constantly been made a subject of reproach against artists and men of letters that they are lacking in wholeness and completeness of nature. As a rule, this must necessarily be so. That very concentration of vision and intensity of purpose, which is the characteristic of the artistic temperament, is in itself a mode of limitation. To those who are preoccupied with the beauty of form, nothing else seems of much importance. Yet there are many exceptions to this rule. Rubens served as an ambassador, and Goethe as a state councillor, and Milton as Latin secretary to Cromwell. Sophocles held civic office in his own city. The humorists, essayists, and novelists of modern America seem to desire nothing better than to become the diplomatic representatives of their country. And Charles Lamb's friend, Thomas Griffiths Wainwright, the subject of this brief memoir, though of an extremely artistic temperament, followed many masters other than art, being not merely a poet and a painter, an art critic, an antiquarian, and a writer of prose, an amateur of beautiful things and a dilettante of things beautiful, delightful, but also a forger of no mean or ordinary capabilities, and a subtle and secret poisoner, almost without rival in this or any age. This remarkable man, so powerful with pen, pencil, and poison, as a great poet of our own day has finely said of him, was born at Chiswick in 1794. His father was a son of a distinguished solicitor of Gray's Inn and Hatton Garden. His mother was the daughter of the celebrated Dr. Griffiths, the editor and founder of the Monthly Review, the partner in another literary speculation of Thomas Davis, that famous bookseller, of whom Johnson said that he was not a bookseller, but a gentleman who dealt in books, the friend of Goldsmith and Wedgwood, and one of the most well-known men of his day. Mrs. Wainwright died in giving him birth at the early age of 21, and an obituary notice in the Gentleman's Magazine tells us of her amiable disposition and numerous accomplishments, and adds somewhat quaintly that she is supposed to have understood the writings of Mr. Locke as well as perhaps any person of either sex now living. His father did not long survive his young wife, and the little child seems to have been brought up by his grandfather, and on the death of the latter in 1803, his uncle George Edward Griffiths, whom he subsequently poisoned. His boyhood was passed at Linden House, Turnham Green, one of those many fine Georgian mansions that have unfortunately disappeared before the inroads of the suburban builder, and to its lovely gardens and well-timbered park he owed that simple and impassioned love of nature which never left him all through his life, and which made him so peculiarly susceptible to the spiritual influences of Wordsworth's poetry. He went to school at Charles Burney's Academy at Hammersmith. Mr. Burney was the son of the historian of music, and the near kinsman of the artistic lad who was destined to turn out his most remarkable pupil. He seems to have been a man of a good deal of culture, and in after years Mr. Wainwright often spoke of him with much affection. As a philosopher, an archaeologist, an admirable teacher, who, while he valued the intellectual side of education, did not forget the importance of early moral training. It was under Mr. Burney that he first developed his talent as an artist, and Mr. Hazlitt tells us that a drawing book which he used at school is still extant and displays great talent and natural feeling. Indeed, painting was the first art that fascinated him. It was not till much later that he sought to find expression by pen or poison. Before this, however, he seems to have carried away by boyish dreams of the romance and chivalry of a soldier's life, and to have become a young guardsman. But the reckless, dissipated life of his companions failed to satisfy the refined artistic temperament of one who was made for other things. In a short time, he wearied of the service. Art, he tells us in words that still move many by their ardent sincerity and strange fervor, art touched her renegade. By her pure and high influence the noisome mists were purged. My feelings, parched, hot, and tarnished, were renovated with cool, fresh bloom, simple, beautiful to the simple-hearted. But art was not to say, did much towards calming the confusing. No, art was not the only cause of this change. The writings of Wordsworth, he goes on to say, did much towards calming the confusing world, necessarily incident to sudden mutations. I wept over them tears of happiness and gratitude. He accordingly left the army with its rough barrack life and coarse messroom tittle-tattle, and returned to Linden House, full of this new-born enthusiasm for culture. A severe illness in which, to use his own words, he was broken like a vessel of clay, prostrated him for a time. His delicately strung organization, however, indifferent it may have been to inflicting pain on others, was itself most keenly sensitive to pain. He shrank from suffering as a thing that mars and maims human life, and seems to have wandered through that terrible valley of melancholia from which so many great, perhaps greater spirits have emerged. But he was young, only 25 years of age, and he soon passed out of the dead black waters, as he called them, into the larger air of humanistic culture. As he was recovering from the illness that had led him almost to the gates of death, he conceived the idea of taking up literature as an art. I said with John Woodville, he cries, it were a life of God's to dwell in such an element, to see and hear and write brave things. These high and gusty relishes of life have no allayings of mortality. It is impossible not to feel that in this passage we have the utterance of a man who had a true passion for letters. To see and hear and write brave things, this was his aim. Scott, the editor of the London magazine, struck by the young man's genius, or under the influence of the strange fascination that he exercised on everyone who knew him, invited him to write a series of articles on artistic subjects, and under a series of fanciful pseudonyms he began to contribute to the literature of his day. Janice Weathercock, Egome Bonmont, and Van Vigvoons were some of the grotesque masks under which he chose to hide his seriousness or to reveal his levity. A mask tells us more than a face. These disguises intensified his personality. In an incredibly short time, he seems to have made his mark. Charles Lamb speaks of a kind, light-hearted Wainwright whose prose is capital. We hear of him entertaining Macready, John Foster, McGinn, Talford, Sir Wentworth Dilke, the poet John Clare, and others. A petit dîner. A petit dîner. Like Disraeli, he determined to startle the town as a dandy. And his beautiful rings, his antique cameo breastpin, and his pale lemon-colored kid gloves were well known and indeed were regarded by Hazlitt as being the signs of new-mannered literature, while his rich curly hair, fine eyes, and exquisite white hands gave him the dangerous and delightful distinction of being different from others. There was something in him of Balzac's Lucien de Rubempré. At times he reminds us of Julian Sorel. De Quincey saw him once. It was at a dinner at Charles Lamb's. Amongst the company, all literary men sat a murderer, he tells us, and he goes on to describe how on that day he had been ill and had hated the face of a man and woman, yet found himself looking with intellectual interest across the table at the young writer, beneath whose affectations of manner there seemed to lie so much unaffected sensibility, and speculates on what sudden growth of another interest would have changed his mood had he known of what terrible sin the guest to whom Lamb paid so much attention was even then guilty.